Nobody expected this debate to go off the rails so fast. The lights in the Manhattan broadcasting studio were blinding, the stage sleek and polished. The audience, made up of journalists, political analysts, and eager onlookers, sat in silence, sensing that they were about to witness something explosive. At the center of it all was Elon Musk, sitting with his signature relaxed posture, one arm resting on the chair's armrest, his expression unreadable. He wasn't nervous. He never was. He had been through 100 interviews like this before. Opposite him, seated just across the glass debate table, was Samuel Grant, one of the most aggressive liberal talk show hosts in the country. A man known for his sharp wit, relentless questioning, and open disdain for anyone who threatened the establishment. And tonight, his target was Elon Musk. The conversation had started with predictable topics: SpaceX, Tesla, AI, social media. But everyone in the room knew where this was going. It was only a matter of time before Grant finally said it. "You are a threat to democracy, Mr. Musk," Grant declared, his voice sharp, filled with conviction. "And I think the American people deserve to know why." A few gasps rippled through the audience. The energy in the room shifted. Musk barely blinked. He tilted his head slightly, watching Grant like a scientist observing an experiment. "Is that a question?" Grant smirked, leaning forward, his hands clasped together. "It's a statement." Musk exhaled slowly, nodding. "I see." He let a pause settle in, a heavy silence that Grant clearly didn't expect. The host cleared his throat. "Let's be honest here, Elon. You control Twitter, X, one of the largest communication platforms on the planet. You've opened the floodgates to misinformation, reinstated banned accounts that were removed for hate speech, and made decisions that have directly influenced elections." He gestured toward Musk with his pen. "So I'll ask you again. Do you believe that your unchecked power is dangerous for democracy?" Musk chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "You're making a few assumptions there, Sam." Grant raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" Musk leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "That I have unchecked power. That's the first mistake." Grant scoffed. "Oh, come on, Elon. You bought one of the most powerful social media platforms in the world. You're the final decision maker. You single-handedly control what narratives get pushed and what voices get silenced. How is that not unchecked power?" Musk smirked, shaking his head. "You say that like I'm sitting in a secret lair somewhere, pulling levers on free speech." Grant's lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you denying that your ownership has led to massive political shifts? Your personal bias is reflected in everything you do." Musk shrugged. "It's fascinating how bias is only a problem when it's not your bias." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Grant stiffened. "That's not what I said." Musk tilted his head. "Isn't it?" Grant inhaled sharply, adjusting his tie. "Elon, let's cut through the theatrics. You've allowed voices that spread misinformation, conspiracy theories, and dangerous rhetoric to return to your platform, all under the guise of free speech. You claim to be about open dialogue, but in reality, you're giving bad actors a megaphone. And that, my friend, is what makes you a threat to democracy." Musk exhaled, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Then slowly, he nodded. "You know, Sam, I appreciate the passion," he said, his voice calm, measured. "But let me ask you something. When the previous owners of Twitter suppressed a major political story weeks before an election, did you call that a threat to democracy?" Grant blinked. Musk kept going. "Or when government agencies had backdoor access to silence people they disagreed with? Was that a threat to democracy?" Grant's mouth opened, but Musk didn't let him speak. "And what about when media corporations, ones with political agendas, collude to push certain narratives while censoring others? When they decide what people can and can't hear, would you call that dangerous rhetoric?" The audience was dead silent. Musk leaned back slightly, his smirk barely visible. "See, Sam, power doesn't scare me." He gestured toward Grant. "But selective outrage does." Grant looked flustered now. "That's..." Musk cut him off. "You're not mad that I have a platform. You're mad that I won't let you control it." The studio audience erupted. Some clapped, others gasped. Grant's face twitched. Musk wasn't done. For years, you and your friends in the media had a monopoly on information. You dictated what was true and what was misinformation. You decided who got to speak and who was silenced. He tilted his head. And now? Now you're mad that people have a choice. Grant's grip on his pen tightened. He had lost control of the conversation. Musk smiled slightly. I'll tell you what a real threat to democracy is, Sam. The audience leaned in. A government that tells private companies what speech to allow. A media class that thinks it should be the final arbiter of truth. A culture where free expression is only protected when it benefits the right people. He folded his arms. That's the real threat, not me. A wave of murmurs and gasps rippled through the studio. Grant looked trapped. He had expected Musk to get defensive, to stumble over his words. Instead, he had flipped the entire argument. The moderator, sensing the awkward silence, cleared his throat. All right, let's... But Musk wasn't done. Sam, he said, locking eyes with the host. If giving people back their voices makes me a threat to democracy, maybe your definition of democracy isn't the same as mine. Silence, then applause. The audience broke into loud claps, some even standing up. Grant sat frozen. He had started this debate thinking he was in control. Now, he was the one looking powerless. The applause echoed through the studio, growing louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Some people clapped hesitantly, unsure if they should, while others, those who had sat through years of controlled narratives and media spin, let their hands smack together with full force. Elon Musk remained unbothered, sitting back in his chair, fingers interlaced, watching Samuel Grant with the calm patience of a man who had already won. Grant's jaw tightened as he shifted in his seat, his fingers gripping the edges of the debate desk just a little too hard. The studio lights reflected off his forehead, and the smug confidence he had walked into this interview with was now nowhere to be found. He cleared his throat, forced a tight smile, and waved a hand toward the audience, as if trying to dismiss the moment. Well, Elon, he said, forcing a chuckle, that was quite the speech. Musk raised an eyebrow. That wasn't a speech. That was an answer. A few laughs rippled through the crowd. Grant's nostrils flared. Let's not pretend you're some great defender of free speech, all right? You've deplatformed people too. You've removed accounts that spread certain narratives. He tapped the desk with his pen, leaning in as if trying to regain control. So tell me, Elon, what makes you any different from the so-called mainstream media you claim to be exposing? Musk's smirk widened slightly. Oh, Sam, he said, shaking his head. You don't actually believe that, do you? Grant's smile faltered. Believe what? That I have the same kind of power you do. Grant blinked. You own Twitter, X, the most influential communication platform in the world. Musk tilted his head. Yes, and yet I still don't have the ability to control public perception the way you do. Grant scoffed. That's ridiculous. Musk's eyes glinted. Is it? He gestured lazily toward the cameras. Let's run an experiment. The room fell silent. Grant didn't like where this was going. If I say something controversial right now, what happens? Musk continued, tilting his head. You'll cut the segment before it airs. You'll make edits. You'll frame the discussion in a way that makes you look like the rational one and me like the dangerous billionaire. Grant stiffened in his chair. Musk smiled. I own one platform. You own perception. The audience gasped. Grant opened his mouth, but Musk wasn't finished. You're upset because I don't let you control the conversation anymore. You're not mad that I have influence. You're mad that you no longer have total influence. Grant wasn't smiling anymore. Musk leaned in slightly. I don't tell people what to think, Sam. I let them think for themselves. You, on the other hand, he smirked, gesturing at the host. You tell people what they're allowed to think. The tension in the studio was unbearable. Grant's fingers curled into a fist, his control over the conversation slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. He inhaled sharply, forcing another chuckle. I see what you're doing, Elon. You're trying to turn this into a debate about the media instead of taking responsibility for your own role in misinformation. Musk sighed dramatically, shaking his head. Sam, misinformation only seems to exist when it challenges your worldview. Grant's face twitched. The audience was no longer with him. A few people in the front row whispered to each other, their expressions shifting. Some who had walked into the studio expecting to watch Musk get humiliated now weren't so sure anymore. Musk leaned back in his chair, adjusting his blazer. "Here's a fun fact," he said. "The people who scream about protecting democracy are usually the ones most afraid of it." The crowd erupted. Grant could barely hide his frustration now. He tapped his pen against the table, trying desperately to regain control. "This isn't about me, Elon," he snapped. "This is about you abusing your platform to push an agenda. If you really believed in fairness, why don't you give up control of X? Why not let someone else run it?" Musk tilted his head. "Why don't you give up your show?" The audience burst into laughter. Grant's lips pressed into a thin line. He had walked into this debate thinking he had the upper hand, that he would force Musk to play defense. Instead, he was the one cornered. The moderator, sensing the studio was slipping away from Grant, quickly shuffled his papers. "All right, gentlemen, let's move on to—" But Musk wasn't done. He turned fully toward Grant, locking eyes with him. "Sam," he said, voice calm but deadly sharp, "you keep calling me a threat to democracy." Grant squared his shoulders, trying to appear unfazed. "Because you are." Musk nodded slowly. "Okay." He folded his hands in front of him. "So answer me this. When did democracy mean controlling who gets to speak? When did democracy mean that only people you agree with deserve a platform?" Grant blinked. Musk didn't let up. "You're terrified of a world where people can challenge you, where they can debate you, where they can question the narratives you push. And now that they can," he smirked, shaking his head, "you call that a threat." Grant's face was flushed now. Musk had flipped the entire debate. The moderator desperately tried to move on. "We need to—" But Musk cut him off. "Sam," he said, his voice cold now, "let me tell you what a real threat to democracy looks like." The audience leaned in. A real threat to democracy is a media class that thinks it's above accountability. A real threat to democracy is when power is only tolerated in the hands of one political side. Grant's mouth tightened. And a real threat to democracy, Musk smirked, glancing toward the cameras, is a host who's afraid of free speech but pretends to be its defender. Silence. Then, an explosion of applause. People stood up from their seats clapping. Even some of the crew members at the back, who weren't supposed to react, couldn't hold back their smirks. Grant sat there motionless, his face a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Musk simply picked up his glass of water, took a sip, and set it back down. "You were saying?" he asked casually. Grant had nothing left to say. By the time the show ended, the audience wasn't talking about Samuel Grant's arguments. They were talking about how Elon Musk had walked into a hostile interview and walked out leaving the entire studio speechless. And Grant, he would never recover from this moment. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us to grow. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Let us know in the comments below.